Hello everyone, it's David from Automotive Press. Did you guys know that many decades ago, when minivans were first introduced, it was a revolutionary thing. Everybody thought this is the greatest thing since sliced bread because it's functional, practical, sliding doors, and family loved it. But fast forward 10, 20, 30 years later, and then the opposite happened where people couldn't stand minivans anymore because of the association of being labeled as a soccer mom or soccer dad, and it was too much of a family car, which led everyone to start buying sport utility vehicles or crossovers, and that's why they've kind of taken over the world now. But here we are in 2024 and 2025 timeframe. People are beginning to say they love the minivans again because of practicality, good price, good value, and actually they're really good to drive as well. So the minivans are fashionable, cool, and most of all, they are in high demand. It's so hard to find them anymore. And honestly, as an engineer, if I compare everything in terms of practicality and functionality, I actually do think minivans make more sense than sport utility vehicles. So let me give you 7 reasons why you might want to buy minivans such as Toyota Sienna rather than a sport utility vehicle or crossover. Let's go. Welcome back. So I'm actually taken back by how good and how practical minivans are, and I especially like the 2024 Toyota Sienna for many different reasons. But I'm going to specifically tell you 7 reasons why it might make more sense to buy a minivan than an SUV. But first, let's just do a quick quality check. This one is built in Princeton, Indiana, alongside with the Toyota Grand Highlander and also Lexus TX. Let's do a quick gap check, which is easy to do because it's only here. It's about 3.9 millimeters, 4 millimeters, and then 3.9 millimeters, and then it's pretty wide over here at 4.2 millimeters. So as you can tell, the gaps are not super narrow because this is a bit of an outdated body design and they haven't changed it for a long time. So in terms of the gaps and so forth, it is still using the older body metrics. So you can tell that it wasn't designed to give you really tight tolerances like you see in the new Grand Highlander or the new Lexus TX. But all the quality looks good. Everything lines up. There's a subtle line that goes through here, another line that goes over here. Everything matches up, and the fuel cap actually is recessed really well. This is kind of hard to do, this contour, but they do that well, and the paint job looks great. Surprisingly, this is the paint color called a cement, and if you recall, that was a very popular color in Tacoma truck and also in the Tundra, but Toyota eliminated that color choice many years ago, but it came back in the minivan format for Sienna. They need to bring it back for the truck lineup because it's one of the greatest colors that I know, and I've owned a number of cars with the cement colors. By the way, for 2025, Toyota Sienna received many modifications and improvements, especially in the interior with upgraded infotainment system, which is a real welcome because the old system was a little bit lacking in terms of capability, and it's also just not all that easy to use. But the new version, which is the same type of software and infotainment system that we see in many other Toyota models, are much easier to use. It's also much more capable, and they made a whole bunch of other changes inside as well, which is very interesting upgrades for 2025. But let me come back to the 2024 Sienna for now, as I have a lot more to say about why minivans are actually really useful and practical and might be one of the best buys for all of us. Coming back to the 7 reasons, first things that you should keep in mind is that the minivans are hot ticket items. It's in demand. It's almost impossible to get one. My friend tried to buy one, another cousin tried to buy one, and they were told 2 or 3 year waiting list, and even then they couldn't guarantee that the minivan or the Sienna would actually arrive at that time. A friend of mine happened to buy one recently, and he was told by a dealer he can bring it back anytime within the first 1 or 2 years, then they'll give him back the full amount because they know they can resell it for higher than MSRP. So the first reason to buy a Toyota Sienna is because the resale value is so high that if you can get one, you will not lose money. You may have to buy a used one for now if you can't find a new one, but buy one now and then sell it 1 year, 2 or 3 years later, and you know the resale value is going to be way better than your typical sport utility vehicle, even compared to the Toyota SUVs. So that's the first reason. The resale value is good, it's in demand, people want it, and it's going to stay that way for a number of years because minivans are simply not as available as more and more companies switch to SUVs, and we have less choice in terms of what you can buy in the minivan market. The second reason is the obvious one, and that is the fact that minivans, dollar for dollar, pound for pound, offers way more space than the typical 3-row SUVs especially three-row SUVs that are based on the truck platform, because they lose some of the space underneath due to their frame design. So coming back to the minivan for a second, not just the front space here, but if you look at the second row space and also the third row, which I have it folded right now, it's just amazing amount of space. I'll talk about the comfort later on, but just look at the legroom. You just cannot replicate this amount of space, even in the full-size, large three-row SUVs. They tend to be a little bit cramped, especially on the third row, but you get so much more practicality, good headroom, good legroom, shoulder room, and these are only possible because this is a unitized body design that is designed to maximize the space for both passenger and also cargo. There's a huge amount of space in the back, especially if you hide away the third row, by the way, because they hide neatly underneath the floor. And so practicality-wise, functionality-wise, you can't beat the minivans. There's no three-row SUVs in the same price range that can offer as much space as a minivan. The third reason is the fact that your passengers, your family, your friends will love you for having a minivan compared to SUV, just like in this Toyota Sienna. Again, as I mentioned earlier, lots of space, but it's also really comfortable. Some versions of La Sienna also has a kind of executive first class type of a design where the ottoman comes up and you can recline and feel like you're in a first class cabin. But even without that, the seats are comfortable, lots of padding compared to a modern SUV that's trying to thin out the padding because they're trying to maximize the space. And most seats in the modern SUVs just aren't that comfortable. But here in the Sienna, again, lots of padding, is super comfortable, lots of space, and the passengers love it, even if they're in the third row, because the third row is actually usable and practical, and you can sit there, maybe even lie down if you need to take a break, and it is very comfortable and roomy. So in terms of total comfort, even including the ride and the quietness, this thing is like a limousine on the wheels, and it is the ultimate people mover. And if the more and more buyers can realize that and forget about buying SUVs and buy a minivans instead, the world will be better, just because for the passengers and family and friends, it's so much more comfortable and enjoyable. Did you notice that it's easy to get out because I'm really low off the ground? You can tell the step in and step out is nice and low. And of course you get this big sliding door that makes it even easier to get in and out. Just step right in. And this is the part that makes minivans so much more practical than sport utility vehicles, because really SUVs don't use sliding doors, except for one model, which is the Toyota Century SUV. That one actually has an optional sliding door for the back, and therefore it is a sport utility vehicle with a minivan features. But most minivans, of course, have sliding doors, and none of the sport utility vehicles other than the Century SUV has a sliding door. So that's one big differentiation. It gives me a huge opening. This doesn't swing out, so you don't have to worry about kids opening doors and hitting somebody else's car. And it just makes it easier to get in and out, especially for older people or people who might have some challenges getting in and out of the cars in general. Can just be slide right out and walk right out. So this is a big difference, I think, between a minivan like the Sienna and sport utility vehicles. So, and this is a huge advantage, and especially in the Sienna here, the opening I find to be big. The sliding door opens effortlessly and gives me lots of space to move in and out. So it's one of those things that makes Toyota Sienna truly valuable. The fifth reason is a clincher, and that is to do with pricing and value. Have you seen the price of a sport utility vehicle these days, especially those with the 3 row of seats? They've gotten so expensive because they're kind of like the premium class these days compared to minivans, which are in demand, but still the prices are very reasonable. In fact, I might even say it's affordable, depending on which versions of the minivan you buy, of course. But for example, this Sienna has a really reasonable price for XSE version, which is what I'm driving now. It's got lots of standard features, even a sunshade, but it's not top of the line. It's even cheaper than some of the basic large SUVs. So pricing is good, and because they retain value so well, as I mentioned, the overall amount of money you use from the time you buy until the time you sell is probably one of the smallest loss you will ever encounter in car's ownership, because you buy it reasonably cheap and you sell it at almost the same price as you bought, maybe 1 or 2 years later. They might even appreciate in some cases. So the life cycle cost is super low compared to many SUVs and crossovers that tend to depreciate like a normal cars these days. And also they might not be the type of car that's in demand. It might be harder to sell. Whereas Toyota Sienna, you're guaranteed to be able to sell because everyone wants this thing and it's in demand, and keeping the value high and keeping the cost low for you. The sixth reason why minivans make sense, especially the Toyota Sienna, well, it's an obvious one because the Toyota Sienna only comes in hybrids now, and it is super efficient. This one has a 2.5 liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine made it to the Toyota's legendary hybrid system, and the electric motors kicks in and out to keep everything in balance, and it is extremely efficient. The fuel economy rating will depend on which model you end up buying, so I'll post it right here, but it is extraordinarily efficient, and you can't quite get the same amount of fuel efficiency in the large 3-row SUVs, but they tend to be big and heavy because they're also tall, especially if they're body-on-frame models like the Toyota Sequoia. Even though that one is a hybrid, because the electric motor is sandwiched between the engine and the transmission, it doesn't function this way like the way that normal hybrids do, and therefore the fuel efficiency of the Toyota Sequoia, for example, is not very good at all. It's terrible actually, compared to Toyota Sienna, which is not all that powerful, but it is extraordinarily efficient. So if you want to save money from fuel, don't buy SUV, buy a minivan. So now I'm driving the 2024 Toyota Sienna on the road, and it actually really surprised me because the handling, the cornering, the ride was exceptional for such a large people mover. It is not a sports car by any means, and it is a bit gutless when you step on the gas, but it is super refined and smooth and predictable, and I get decent amount of steering feedback when I'm driving, and even when I try to move quickly like this, the response is better than many large crossovers and SUVs that I've driven in the past year or so. This thing is stable, it feels quite agile for a large vehicle, and when I take it through corners like this, I'm not losing the positioning because this thing tracks really well. Compare that to large 3-row SUVs, like as I mentioned, especially if it's a body-on-frame like a Sequoia or even the current gen 4Runner, it just swings quite a bit when you turn the corners because it's body-on-frame, and they tend to set high and tall. And even for a unitized body like let's say Toyota Grand Highlander or Lexus TX, for example, because they're so big, they just don't handle very well, and there's a kind of lack of feel in the steering when you're driving them. But when it comes to this particular Toyota Sienna, I get good feedback from the road. The steering is a little bit heavier than what I would have observed in normal SUVs, and you don't set super high, so it's just an easier vehicle to drive, I find. In fact, it is kind of pleasant to drive. It's not as absent feeling, it's not as numb feeling as many large crossovers and SUV these days. This one feels more like a car because of the fact that this is a unitized body, but it was designed to feel like a car. And perhaps that's the strength of a minivan, is that they're trying to feel more like a car, whereas many crossovers and especially sport utility vehicles are trying to feel more like a truck. They want to give you that truck feel, sitting up nice and high. So those are some of my observations. I think the minivans are super underrated, especially the Toyota Sienna, because people don't talk about them. Maybe they're even embarrassed to buy a minivan, but if we can put that aside for a moment, they just make so much more sense than crossovers or 3-row SUVs. And if I really need to carry a large number of people in comfort and with refinement and in a way that provides maximum efficiency at the lowest price possible, and also I don't want to lose too much money over the life cycle of the ownership, you cannot beat a 2024 Toyota Sienna. This should be first on your list, even more so than, let's say, Toyota Grand Highlander, and especially compared to something like Toyota Sequoia, which is just too expensive, too bulky, and too much of a gas guzzler. And I cannot recommend that particular model. So I'm not too crazy about Sequoia as a whole. I think the Grand Highlander is a far better choice, even though it's a unitized body. But most of all, if you just want to be able to move people around in comfort, Toyota Sienna as a minivan is actually the ultimate choice. It's the best choice. So I hope you enjoyed my video and you learned a few things. If you did, give me a thumbs up, make some comments, and if you haven't done so yet, would you kindly subscribe as well. Until next video, I'm signing off for now. Thank you so much.